Here's a few things about the differences between the Baroque and the modern violins and bows. Here's our two fiddles. My Baroque fiddle happens to be cornerless, but that's just a whim of the maker. And here's the modern fiddle that I have. The main difference I wanted to point out is the, let's see, that's not going to work. Let's try it this way. Angle between the body of the instrument and the fingerboard. On the modern instrument that maybe most of you are used to, actually only, I think about half of you play the Baroque violin, so half and half. The modern instrument, the neck angles down towards the floor as it goes further away from the body. And on the Baroque instrument, you can see the neck goes straight back. So, and that makes a big difference in how the instrument reacts. Reacts to the Baroque instrument reacts to a much lighter touch because the end point here starts higher, so it's less of an angle across the bridge. And that means there's less force going downward into the violin than the modern violin, which angle starts down here further down, and so you have a sharper angle across the bridge, so there's more force for the same tension of string going down into the violin, and that puts the whole violin under more tension for the modern violin compared to the Baroque violin. And that means that the response is going to be different. The modern violin under more tension is going to prefer a sustained sound and a controlled technique with the bow. And the Baroque violin, which is under less tension, is going to prefer a released sound. So you're not going to sustain the sound as much through it. If you do sustain the sound, you have to do it with a kind of a shape that allows a lot of air and movement into the sound. And it's going to have a less controlled bow technique and more kind of natural, let the bow do what it's going to do kind of technique. And now the bows sort of match those characteristics. So the modern violin, which is under more tension, likes a more sustained sound and more controlled technique, has the corresponding longer bow, so it can be better for sustaining compared to the Baroque bow. So you see that just right off the bat, the modern bow and the Baroque bow are different in length. The modern bow is longer, and you see a very important part is the tip there. The very tip of the bows are very different shape. So the modern bow has an elbow, and the Baroque bow is tapered to a tip. And those two differences, the length and the shape of the tip, make for a very different feel. So if I just chose one of the fiddles, I'll just take the modern fiddle for now. And you can hear that if I just go back and forth, it's pretty equal. Maybe on the up bow, it's a little bit lighter, but pretty much equal. I'll try with a real good sound here. I'm just trying to go back and forth without controlling or changing anything. Just back and forth without changing anything. And now I'll just do the same thing with the Baroque bow, with a tapered tip, you see. And you'll hear just back and forth, and all of a sudden the up bows sound much lighter. Stronger, lighter. Because there's not that elbow and length of the bow to give it more weight at the tip. And then on the Baroque violin, using the same two bows, the Baroque violin, again, having less tension, under less tension, it really enjoys that sense of release that that lighter Baroque bow that's tapered gives it naturally. It likes to just release. If I try to play with a modern bow, On the Baroque violin, you can do it, but it's a little unwieldy sounding. You can just sort of hear it's a little too heavy for it, and it's trying to sustain on an instrument that doesn't like to. Now you can use a modern bow on a Baroque violin if you're just ever so careful with it, so you're not going to really sustain extra hard, and you kind of just more gently play, and you let it release more. You can get away with it, but it's not the natural pairing. They don't agree so well with each other. They're not great friends. But there's a bow in the middle. This is a classical style bow, like around the time of Haydn and Mozart. And you can see it's kind of in between the two of the other bows. So let's see if I can get all three of those bows going at once here. Let's see if I put the frogs together, or where they start, the hair starts out of the frog there. That's about, you can see that there, sure enough, the Baroque bow's shortest, the classical bow in the middle is in between. It's hard to balance them. And then let's see if I can just get the classical and the modern. You see there, I'm starting with the hair starting at the same place, and then you see it's just a little bit shorter, and then the Baroque bow is the shortest one. And you see that, look at the tips of the modern and the modern is on that side, and the classical's on this side. They're pretty close. They both have elbows, but you see the classical bow has a little kind of a curve to the wooden part, and the modern bow just goes straight perpendicular to the hair. And that also makes a big difference. So they're a little bit shorter and with that curve. So it's actually, I'm talking about in the opposite order. We start with, chronologically, with the Baroque bow. And then for the classical technique around Mozart's time, they wanted a little bit more control, and perhaps the violins also were starting to get a little bit more under more tension. And so this classical style transitional bow allows for more control, but still some characteristics of the Baroque. And so it's a little bit longer, but not as long as the modern bow, but a little bit longer than the Baroque bow. And but that added curve allows both for a sustain. Here's the Baroque violin though. But it's not going to be as unwieldy as the you can still play it on a Baroque violin. And you can all of a sudden start to do more spiccato and things. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But that added curve, or I should say the curve that they had before they took it away from the modern bow, gives a little bit more of that not quite as a crisp kind of an attack. Like, you can play, very crisply, but it just has a little bit more rounder bow changes compared to the modern. That's a little bit more kind of really crisp on either side. And in terms of just going back and forth with the bow, and once again, the Baroque, you really hear the difference between the heavier and lighter. And also, you can really do lots of flourishes very quickly, very easily. Kind of a thing. Maybe that's a good thing to continue with. Now, if I did the same kind of thing with the each of the other two bows, let's just hear what that's like. It's a little bit more kind of scrubby-dubby. So what I want to do is I just want to lighten up a little bit, not full-on spiccato yet. Right? And then still pretty much on the string. But then for the modern bow, the same kind of a flourish, what happens? That's really scrubby-dubby. So what I need to do on that is I have to actually take the bow off the string and control that stroke with a more controlled technique called spiccato, of course. So, instead of on the string. Right? But going back to the Baroque, that's exactly what I want to do. I'm not going to do the spiccato. I'm just going to let it do what it wants to do. And because of that natural lightness lets the air in and lets the natural spoken quality of both the gut strings and the lesser tension of the violin just speak like speech, just on its own, without having to control and make the bow come off the string. If I can try to make it come off the string, but again, it's not what it likes to do. It just likes to go back and forth and speak on its own natural terms. And again, controlling the bow, the bow controlled technique on the modern violin with the modern bow would apply to just repeated notes, for example, like eighth notes like this. And of course, you'd probably want to make them short if there were a lively movement, or if it was a slower movement, you could do like this. And once again, it's different with the Baroque bow, which likes to have like a nice down bow, but then very light on the up bow. So what do you do with that? Well, you can do them in pairs like this. Again, speech-like. It's a little harder to do that on the modern bow. You have to kind of control it, so you kind of but it loves to sustain it. And that's not so easy on the Baroque bow. You can do it, but it just doesn't like to do that. It likes to release. So again, you have that sort of dig in on the down, and then just light on the up. Or you could do in fours, the similar. Start with a nice long dug in one, and then get lighter and lighter. This is even more obvious on the Baroque violin. So the same thing, I'll just do in fours again. And you can really hear how it likes just release and get lighter and lighter, and it just loves that. And I can just get so soft. Right? On the modern violin, it's a little hard to get that soft. You have to control the sound again. It just kind of gets like surfacey. You can't really kind of get a whole tone. Maybe you can get way down here. You can try it. You can try it. You have to really control it. But on the Baroque violin, you can just expand the sound down right to silence. And you don't have to sort of jump up to here, like on the modern violin. So that's one thing that is a bit of a compromise if you're playing a modern violin, to try to get this extra swirly effect that we'll talk about. But everything's compromises. So, but just again, you get that the Baroque violin under lesser tension. You can really sort of go from nothing. You don't have to sort of start, but and then how to do that on the modern violin? Well, now that you know that that's there and a possibility, you can still do it. It's just a little harder. So instead of, but you might go, and maybe not worry too much about getting super good tone all the time, but. Bring expand that possibility of the sound right down the edge of silence. So how you hold the different fiddles in the different styles, I think, is kind of interesting. How you move with them. I'll just touch on give you some basic ideas, and then if you want to pursue more about them. Then you can ask me about them personally. But just to give you a quick little survey and a comparison, if you're coming at this from the Baroque side of things, You probably have a little bit experience with, in your early days probably, of learning the violin of modern techniques, so you kind of know what that kind of both of them are like, but you might not know what Cape Breton motion and hold is, and that's a different kettle of fish as well, which I think really is quite fun, especially with the 18th century Scottish music. But if you're coming from the classical, modern, conventional classical technique, you might not know either the Baroque or the Cape Breton. On the other hand, if you're coming from Cape Breton technique, then maybe the other two. So anyway, I'll just give you a little bit of a survey of those three. And of course, the one that I'm going to use the least would be the conventional classical technique. But I'm going to put that in there because that's usually a good point of reference for some people. So to start with, just how you hold the fiddle. It's been a while since I've played conventional classical music, but I'll just simulate it right now. So I don't have a shoulder rest, but on the modern fiddle I've got the chin rest, and for holding the violin in classical, it's going to be somewhat to the side, not way over here, but kind of mostly over on my shoulder to the left. And I'm going to, even though I don't have a shoulder rest, I'm going to still make sure that I can hold it with my chin and neck or jaw, so that it's kind of secure over there on its own. So it's going to look like that. But in securing the violin like that, so that I have the agility and the flexibility of moving the fingers up and down and so on, for the conventional classical technique, I lose something. It's a compromise once again. So instead of what I lose is the ability to move the violin on an ongoing basis, independently of my neck and my shoulder, and even to some extent my arm. So in other words, that translates into motion where the head and the shoulder and the arm and the violin are moving as a unit. And I'm just going to compare that right away and contrast that with the Baroque method, Baroque way, at least the way I see it and feel it and play it. And that is, instead of holding it this far out, I'm going to just bring it in a little bit more in front. I'm going to find that collarbone that I have there, and just put the bottom of the end of the fiddle, the middle of the fiddle, right on, balance it right on the collarbone, and then balance it on the other side just with a V, just the V between your thumb and pointer finger there. And all of a sudden now I don't need to have my neck and chin and so on the violin, and I have all this independent motion. You see, it can go, especially up and down is really good, side to side a bit, around, make circles. But all of a sudden now, and especially if I use more, any kind of body language I have with my flexing with my knees or the bow and so on, that's going to be expanded from the motion. It's going to be expanded with this added flexibility. Instead of having it like that, you see, now, I can make it even more effective to actually express the kind of character that I want in the moment through this motion. And coincidentally, because the Baroque violin is under less tension and reacts to a lighter touch, that is going to be a big part of how you get from the tangible technique to the intangible, expressing that mood or that feeling or that emotion through your motion of the body. With the modern violin, it's possible. You just have to believe a little bit more that that's going to happen. So just a quick demonstration of that. I'll just use a Baroque bow. So if I wanted to play a nice, strong, long note, it might sound like this. That's with a Baroque bow, of course. It's a little strange. And if I have everything kind of together. I'm kind of moving a bit, but it's all attached together. So again. Okay. And now if I do more Baroque motion, it's a modern violin at the moment, but I'm going to bring it in and it's on my collarbone. I'm taking my chin off. I'm balancing at the other end. I'm going up and down, and instead of this, I've got this. And again, the Baroque wants to just send it off, release the sound. So instead of this, it just wants to go for a nice strong note. So again, between this and this. And on the Baroque violin, you can even hear the difference even more so. So for the sort of more modern approach, doesn't like to sustain, does it? Rather do this. And just likes to release. And then the other way around, if I wanted to play a more tender note, it might sound like this, modern. Versus the Baroque way, and you can hear more shape all of a sudden because I have that natural motion that's going to naturally shape the note instead of having to control it. If I wanted to control it with the modern technique, I have to sort of think, okay, I'm going to start soft, I'm going to get louder, then I'm going to get soft again, something like this. Right? Or the Baroque way, I don't have to worry about all that. I just let the body do that, with the lighter bow helping along the way. Right. And again, on the Baroque violin, it's just even more obvious how that motion translates into the character. If I want a tender note, I want to do that instead of that, right? So a tender note. Instead of this. Right, like this. Now, some people just trying the Baroque violin for the first time, and they try to balance the fiddle. They'll notice, like, how do you keep it from slipping? And I can keep it from slipping because I'm used to how to balance it there. I've been doing it for a number of years. But to start with, I still use a chamois cloth, which is always a good, handy thing. That's kind of a thin leather, gives a little bit of a stickiness sense. So now, once it's there balancing, it's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't you can sort of let it fall, but if it's really even just there on its own weight, it's just going to stay there. But without, on the slippery shirt, it could fall more easily. So get chamois cloth as your friend. Just tuck that in there, and then that'll give you more freedom, a little more sense of security, so it's not going to fall, and you can still have that lovely sense of motion. Okay, now the different bows. I'm going to leave the transitional bow on its own for a little. Don't worry about that too much, but we'll just look at the other two bows. So, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the Baroque bow for now. And I'll just actually start with how you go from a modern grip, which maybe looks a little bit like this, to a Baroque grip, which looks more like this. I don't know if you notice that right away, what the difference in the shape of the arm is really one of the things that I noticed right away. It's in a modern grip, you have everything is kind of more perpendicular to the bow, perhaps the fingers. You really have that pinky really curved and balancing and able to control the technique. And again, the straight wrist, and it's quite straight. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of almost like a little magic string tied to your wrist. Just pull it up, pull that wrist up, and then move the fingers a bit forward. And then now all of a sudden you have a curve up around with the wrist as being the high point, the curve. And again, back to the modern, and then course, the Baroque way. And that just gives more leeway, kind of lets the bow lead. Lets the bow direct what's going on with the articulations, and through, so it almost like it goes directly from your body motion into what the bow will get out of that body motion, and then it will naturally come out with that character. Instead of, the modern bow grip and arm is very good for really controlling every aspect of that. How slow or fast, rather than just letting your body kind of lead the way through the bow. And the Baroque bow is more a little bit more kind of led by the bow grip is more led by the bow, rather than controlling it with the wrist and the arm. That's also partnered, that bow, the sense of the bow leading through the body motion, with how the violin moves to meet the bow, quite literally. So instead of the bow kind of coming up and just coming down on the string and then starting to move, right? Instead, you've got the bow kind of dropping. It could be gently or less gently. It could be kind of more of that kind of a drop, right? Or it could be a gentle drop, a tender drop, right? But it's helped by what the violin does, the Baroque violin. So instead of it being all for the bow to do, if I want a tender beginning, my body motion is going to be this kind of a motion, but it's also, the violin is going to be meeting the bow. I could almost just keep the bow straight right there, and the violin will meet the bow without the bow actually doing anything. Watch. Just for a little while, for a little bit. See, I'm not even moving the bow. I'm just moving the violin. Moving it up to meet the bow. Now if I do both, now it's just the bow, let's go back to just the bow. So here's just the bow. And here's just the violin now. Now I'll put them together. Right, the same thing would be for a more lively thing. So instead of this, right, and instead of just this, I can do both. Right, and again, it just expands that effectiveness and possibility of just how much you can change and shape the character just through the motion of your body, in the way that the Baroque playing style is. So it could be like, right, or it could be, and that's pretty much all just led by the intention of the feeling I want that's going through the body into the beginning of the passage, and then just letting the flexible bow arm and hand let the bow take that information of the motion for the body and just do what it does naturally. Now, how does all that fit with Cape Breton music? Well, as you can hear, the Baroque style is quite has a kind of a spoken characteristic, because it's you just hear those beginnings are so important. Whether it's like, again, really an energetic one, right, or a tender one. The beginnings of the notes. That's very. I find that's very, has a spoken characteristic, because of, are you softly beginning, or are you saying something very loud and with lots of consonants? It's kind of spoken in that way, and those are articulations, and of course they're in classical music too, of course, in very subtly and complex ways, but just naturally, the Baroque violin, which is under less tension, reacts to a lighter touch, and so that kind of spoken quality, I think, comes out much more easily. But in Cape Breton music, there's also a spoken quality to the playing, but it comes out in a different way. Instead of with this kind of flexible motion with the violin, it's almost, in some ways, it's the opposite from Baroque music. The violin is not necessarily going to be independent like that, but it's going to be very solid where you are. So instead of, for example, this, with the violin moving like this, the Cape Breton might be more like this. Kind of a thing. You have all these possible articulations that are coming from the violin being solid, but not necessarily, sort of held in one place, but right there, not moving. You can hear energy on every single note, and also a lot of differences from one to another. So it's not, but again, you get the body motion going to help that kind of spoken articulation quality come out. And so when you're just playing like notes back and forth, like in a reel or something, right? Instead of just back and forth, or like a Baroque, right? But it's a different kind of a spoken quality. More of the Cape Breton style, and the bow hold is different again. So here's the classical, and here's more the Baroque, and here is the Cape Breton. And Cape Breton can be anything from like this, down to here, but it's generally going to be somewhere where you can push the bow down bow, which is a strange concept. So instead of pulling the bow like this on the down bow, you're going to push. See, I'm pushing, and then I'm pushing back again. It's a double push, kind of a stroke. So that way, that means that the fiddle has to be kind of in a way that you can get your angle so that you're feeling like you're pushing down bow instead of pulling down bow. And to do that, it really helps to have a little bit more fiddle, the bow hand rather, more up angled into the bow, rather than, so like you have sort of classical, Baroque, Cape Breton. So in a way, the classical is furthest, most perpendicular, and then as you get for the Baroque and the Cape Breton are a little bit closer together. But I'm using the modern fiddle right now to show the Cape Breton, because of course that's how the Cape Breton fiddlers play on the modern fiddle. But you can also play the same Cape Breton style with the Baroque violin and bow. So again, I'm like this, I'm pushing down, so it's push instead of pull, but push. And the ornaments as well in Cape Breton and Baroque are all often, mostly really from the note, like it's from the beat. The Cape Breton, and the same thing for the Baroque. Unless you're talking Italians. Anyway, that's a little bit of an introduction to the various ways of holding the fiddle that we'll be talking about in this course, and especially the Baroque, the motion involved with the freedom and the lightness and the release of the touch, and the Cape Breton style of the spoken articulations and groove that you can get that way.